The rain was warm that night, too warm for November. It slicked down the city's silver towers and hissed across the windows of Elara's apartment like a warning. She stood by the glass, her fingers resting on the cold pane, trying to remember the weight of his hand in hers. But her palms felt empty. Not just without him. Empty in a deeper way. As if they'd been erased. She couldn't remember his touch. Not the warmth, not the shape, not the texture. Only the ache that came afterward. A low hum echoed through the room. The antique music box he'd left behind had started playing on its own again. Tick, 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 then a haunting melody, slow and disjointed, like a heart that had forgotten how to beat properly. Elara whispered his name. Kael. The lights flickered. And from the reflection in the window, she saw it. Two silhouettes standing where there should have been only one. Her heart froze. She turned around. The room was empty. Only the music box kept playing, the tune unraveling like a secret someone didn't want her to remember. The next morning, sunlight crawled across the hardwood like pale fingers reaching for her. Elara hadn't slept. The music box had stopped sometime before dawn, but the melody still pulsed behind her ribs, each note reminding her of something she'd lost but couldn't name. She knelt where the music box had been, its lid cracked, the tiny dancer inside frozen mid-twirl. Something about the floor beneath it seemed uneven. She pressed her palm down. Tap, tap. Hollow. Her breath caught. Elara fetched a screwdriver and pried up a single floorboard. Beneath it, wrapped in oil-stained cloth, was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting on it was unmistakable. Kael's. The words were blurred by time and moisture, but she could still make out the opening line. If you're reading this, it means I failed to come back in time. Her throat went dry. Failed? Come back from where? Another line below. Don't trust anyone who remembers your hands. A floorboard creaked behind her. Elara froze. She turned slowly to see the doorknob twist. The lock she knew she had fastened last night clicked open from the other side. The door opened with a soft sigh, and Elara's pulse leapt to her throat. She clutched the folded letter against her chest and stepped back, every instinct screaming for silence. A man stood framed in the doorway. Tall. Rain dripping from the collar of his coat. His eyes, gray, unreadable, swept the room like he'd been here before. Elara, he said softly, as though testing the air. She didn't answer. Her mind spun. Who was he? One of Kael's colleagues? A stranger who'd somehow found his way into her apartment? He stepped closer, and she noticed the faint scar that crossed his knuckles, a crescent mark she knew too well. Her breath hitched. Kael? He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that had once undone her. You remember my name. That's good. But something in his tone didn't match the words. It was cold, rehearsed, like an actor reciting lines he no longer believed. She reached out before she could stop herself, trembling fingers hovering near his hand. And then it happened again. Her hands refused him. They shook violently, as if repelled. The memory of touch simply slipped away. He watched her reaction, eyes glinting with a strange relief. Then it worked, he murmured. You're still safe. Safe from what? She demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a second letter, sealed with the same wax emblem as hers. I wasn't supposed to come back, Kael said. But you started remembering too soon. Before she could speak, the lights flickered once more, and the window behind her shattered inward, a gust of black feathers swirling through the air like a living storm. The feathers spun through the air like shards of night, slicing through the golden light that flickered from the broken lamp. They didn't fall, they hovered, suspended, trembling with a strange static hum. Elara stumbled backward, covering her face. What is this? Kael didn't answer right away. He stared at the feathers as if they were old acquaintances he'd hoped never to see again. They found us, he whispered. Elara, listen. Whatever happens, don't touch them. Too late. One feather brushed against her arm. The room tilted. In an instant, she was somewhere else, a corridor made of endless mirrors, each one showing a reflection of herself clutching someone's invisible hand. 1,000 versions of her, all remembering touch. Elara. Kael's voice echoed from somewhere far away, distorted like it was underwater. Let it go. Don't remember yet. She tried to move, but her body was rooted to the mirrored floor. The reflections began to ripple. In each, the unseen hand tightened its hold, until one of the mirrors cracked, and blood-dark light leaked through the fracture. The real world rushed back with a violent pull. She collapsed onto the floorboards of her apartment, gasping. Kael caught her before she hit the ground. His touch burned like static electricity, but for a moment, she felt him.
Warm. Real.
Her eyes fluttered open. What are they, Kael? He looked at her, torn between confession and fear. The feathers aren't from this world, he said quietly. They're what happens when the past refuses to stay buried. Then, almost to himself, he added, They've come to collect what I stole. The air was heavy with a scent of rain and static. Feathers drifted in slow, unnatural circles around them, whispering against the walls like restless memories. Elara steadied herself, her voice barely more than a tremor. What did you steal, Kael? He hesitated. His jaw tightened, as though every word would cost him. Finally.
Time, he said.
Elara blinked. Time, he nodded. Yours. The word struck like a slap. You, what are you talking about? Kael stepped closer, the light catching in his eyes, revealing the exhaustion behind them. You were dying, Elara. 2 years ago. The doctors gave you days. I couldn't accept it. A feather brushed against his shoulder and hissed away into smoke. So, I found a way to steal the moments you would have lost. I took time for myself, every heartbeat, every memory, and gave them to you. Her lips parted in disbelief. That's impossible. I know, he said quietly. But it worked.
You lived.
You just don't remember how. Elara's heart pounded. The puzzle pieces shifted in her mind, the gaps in her memories, the days that blurred together, the strange way her hands seemed to forget warmth. She whispered, That's why I can't remember your touch. Kael nodded. Because part of me stayed where it shouldn't have. The moment I gave you life, the world marked me as missing. And now. The lights dimmed again, and the feathers suddenly changed direction, swirling into a funnel above the broken window. A shadow began to take shape within it, tall, faceless, and moving closer. Kael's voice hardened. Now they're here to take me back. The temperature dropped so fast that Elara could see her breath bloom white in the dark. The shadow in the vortex thickened, fluid, rippling like smoke trapped in human form. It spoke without sound. A voice that was not a voice, threading directly into her thoughts. Borrowed time must be returned. Kael stepped in front of her. You can't take it. She's not yours. The shadow's outline quivered, and for an instant Elara glimpsed faces within it, hundreds of them, each flickering like a photograph catching fire. She carries what was never meant to last, it whispered. The stolen hours, the borrowed breath. Give them back, or both will fade. Elara's knees weakened. Both. Kael's hand found hers, and again her palms convulsed with a strange, forgetting tremor. But this time she refused to let go. No, she said. You took from yourself to save me. Then I'll give it back. I'll share it. The shadow laughed, a sound like wind through a graveyard. Time cannot be shared, only surrendered. Kael turned to her, desperation and love warring in his eyes. If it takes me, you'll live. If it takes both, everything we've done, everything ends. A violent gust tore through the room, scattering papers and feathers. The shadow surged forward. Kael pushed her aside, and the vortex swallowed him whole. Elara screamed. The apartment fell silent. The feathers fluttered to the ground, lifeless. Only the music box remained, still playing that fractured tune. But this time, over its melody, came a faint whisper, Kael's voice, fading in and out. Find me, where time forgot. The whisper looped in her mind long after the storm had gone. Find me where time forgot. Elara clutched the music box to her chest. The little dancer inside had stopped spinning, one porcelain hand raised toward the ceiling, as if pointing.
Toward the attic.
She'd never been up there. Each step up the narrow staircase groaned beneath her weight. The air grew thick with dust and the faint scent of cedar and ozone. When she reached the top, she found a single trunk sitting in the center of the floor, its brass lock engraved with the same emblem as Kael's letters, a circle split by a single line, half dark, half light. The moment she touched it, the music box began to play again. But this time, the tune played backward. The latch sprang open. Inside lay an old pocket watch, stopped at 11:11, and a photograph of Kael standing in front of a clock tower she didn't recognize. On the back of the photo, in his handwriting, the place between seconds.
Her pulse raced.
Where time forgot, she murmured. You meant this. The pocket watch began to tick again, slow at first, then faster, until the entire attic seemed to breathe with it. The walls shimmered, warping like reflections on water. The air bent. Elara staggered backward, but before she could move, the floor gave way beneath her. Falling through a kaleidoscope of still images, her first laugh with Kael, their last fight, his promise, her tears. Every memory unfolding at once. Then, suddenly, silence. She landed on her feet in a city she'd never seen. The sky was motionless, caught between night and dawn. The clocks in every window read 11:11, and not a single second passed. She whispered to the still air, "Kael?" And from the shadows, a voice answered, calm, low, and impossibly close. "You found me." He stepped out from behind a clockwork archway, his coat torn, his eyes gleaming faintly in the unmoving light. "Kael," Elara whispered, breath catching. He smiled, soft but sorrowful. "You shouldn't have followed me here." The city stretched endlessly, streets of glass and bronze, buildings suspended mid-motion. A dropped coin forever falling, a bird frozen in the act of flight. Everything shimmered as though trapped in a single heartbeat. Elara took a step toward him. "You said to find you." "I did." He looked around, voice low. "But this place, it's not meant for the living." Something in his tone chilled her more than the still air. "Then how are you here?" Kael's gaze dropped. "Because I became what the world wouldn't allow, a man caught between seconds. Every breath I take here costs me the memory of another moment with you." Her throat tightened. "Then come back with me. We'll fix it together."
Kael shook his head.
"You can't. Time here doesn't move forward, it consumes. The longer you stay, the more it takes." And as if to prove it, she felt it, her heartbeat slowing, her hands beginning to pale, outlines blurring at the edges. "Elara, listen," he said urgently. "The way out lies at the clock tower in the city's heart. But you must not stop along the way. Whatever or whoever you see, they are echoes. They'll try to keep you." He pressed the pocket watch into her palm. "When it strikes 12, you'll have one chance to leave. Not a second more." A distant bell began to toll, though none of the clocks moved. Kael looked up sharply. "They know you're here." From the end of the silent street, a dozen figures began to emerge. Each wore her face. The figures moved in eerie unison, barefoot against the glass street, their reflections multiplying endlessly beneath them. Each wore Elara's face, but not quite. One smiled too wide. One's eyes were hollow. One wept soundlessly. Kael grabbed her hand. "Don't look at them." But she couldn't help it. Each one seemed to carry a piece of her past. One whispered the lullaby her mother used to hum. Another mouthed, "You let him die." And a third, with trembling lips, whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." They began to close in, surrounding her like petals on a dying flower. Kael pulled her close. "They're the moments you left behind, the ones that remember what your hands forgot." Elara's voice cracked. "Then they're memories?" "Fragments," he said. "They want to return to you. But if they do, this place will keep you. Forever." The nearest double reached out. Her fingers grazed Elara's cheek, and the world flickered. Suddenly she was back in her old apartment, laughing, cooking dinner with Kael, warmth filling her chest. Then Kael's voice sliced through the illusion. "Elara, fight it." The memory shattered like glass, and she stumbled back into the still city. Kael caught her, his hands steady but his outline flickering, fading slightly around the edges. "You're losing form," she gasped. He smiled sadly. "I told you. Every second here costs me another piece of us." Behind them, the lookalikes began to hum, a low, resonant note that made the air shimmer. The bell tower loomed in the distance, frozen but pulsing with faint light. Elara gripped his hand tighter. "Then we run." Kael nodded once, his gray eyes fierce. "Together." And they sprinted through the silent city, chased by the sound of their own forgotten selves. Their footsteps echoed like gunshots in the still air, the hum of the doppelgangers swelling behind them. The glass streets twisted into spirals of bronze and smoke, leading them toward the towering shape that loomed over the city, a clock tower that shouldn't have been possible. It rose into the sky, gears grinding silently, its hands frozen just before midnight. By the time they reached its base, Elara's chest was heaving. The air here was thicker, heavy with the scent of iron and rain. Kael pressed a trembling hand to the door. It opened with a sigh, as if recognizing him. Inside, the tower was alive. Clockwork hearts pulsed in the walls, gears beating like arteries, threads of gold light running between them. And in the center stood a great pendulum, motionless, suspended above a pit of black water. "This is it," Kael said quietly. "The moment I stole time from." Elara stepped closer, feeling the air hum against her skin.
"How?"
Kael hesitated, then reached into his coat. He pulled out a small silver blade, etched with runes that shimmered faintly in the still light. "I cut a second in half," he said simply. "And half of it became yours." Her breath caught. "So, if I give it back, you die," he said softly. "If I keep it, I fade." A sound rippled through the tower, like wind moving backward. Elara turned. The doppelgangers were inside. They filled the doorway, their faces melting together into a single mirrored form. Kael grabbed her shoulders. "When the clock moves again, it'll open the way out. But only one of us can cross." "No," Elara whispered, tears stinging. "We both do. Or neither." Kael smiled, a flicker of the man she once knew, gentle, resolute. "That's what I love about you," he said. Then the pendulum began to swing. Time started again. The first swing of the pendulum shook the tower to its bones. Dust and light cascaded through the air like falling stars, and with each beat of that colossal clock, time twitched, starting, stopping, bleeding between moments. Kael's form flickered faster now. Every second that ticked forward stole another piece of him. Elara clung to him. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," he said, voice breaking. "When I split time, I tore the thread that held us both to it. The only way to mend it is for one of us to let go." The mirrored figure stepped closer, its many faces twisting into one, a reflection of both of them. "The second belongs to neither," it whispered, voice layered and deep. "It must return to its keeper." Kael turned to Elara, his hands trembling as he lifted the silver blade. "If I give back what I took, you'll live in full again, but you'll forget me completely. Every touch, every heartbeat." She stared at him, the tower spinning in her vision. "Then, what's the point of surviving?" Kael's eyes softened.
"To live."
"Even if your hands forget, maybe your heart won't." The pendulum swung again, boom. The air fractured, the mirrored being reached toward them, its arms stretching like liquid glass. Kael pressed the blade into her palm. Elara cut the second. "Set it free." Tears streamed down her face. "I can't." "You can," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "Because you already did once." The tower howled as gears spun and time buckled. Elara raised the blade, and the moment her hand struck the glowing thread that hovered before them, light exploded outward like a heartbeat reborn. Kael's face was the last thing she saw before everything went white. Elara awoke to sunlight, real sunlight, warm and gold and alive. Rain tapped gently against the windowpane. The city outside moved again, cars, people, birds in flight. Time had found its rhythm. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. The silver blade lay on her bedside table, Dull now, its runes gone. Beside it rested the pocket watch, its hands finally turning. She sat up, searching the room for any sign of him. Kael? Silence. Only the ticking of the watch. And yet, something felt different. Her palms no longer trembled. When she brushed them together, she could feel the texture of her own skin, the warmth of the sunlight. But when she reached for her memories, the space where Kael should have been was a hollow, an ache without a face. Still, when she looked at the music box across the room, her heart twisted in recognition. She didn't know why, but she wound it carefully, and the tune began to play again, clearer than ever before. She closed her eyes, and though her mind didn't remember, her heart did. Somewhere, in a place without seconds, Kael watched the sunlight dance on her face. The tower around him was dark now, but he smiled, because her laughter reached him faintly, carried by a heartbeat that was no longer his own. He whispered into the still air, "That's enough." And as the clock tower faded into nothingness, a single black feather drifted across Elara's windowsill, turning white as it touched the light. Elara looked up at it, inexplicably smiling through tears. "I don't know who you were," she murmured, "but thank you." Outside, a bell struck noon, and for the first time in years, her hands remembered how to hold the world again. Weeks passed. Elara learned to live again. She painted, she laughed, she took long walks in the rain. Yet sometimes, when the light hit glass or the seconds on a clock stuttered, she felt something watching. Not in menace, but in memory. The feather she'd found had never vanished. Instead, it had hardened into a charm of pale crystal, weightless and warm. She kept it beside the pocket watch, though both pulsed faintly when night fell, as if syncing with a heartbeat not her own. One evening, while the city slept beneath a soft fog, Elara heard a sound she hadn't heard since that night. The music box, playing by itself. Only this time, the tune was whole. She followed it into the living room, heart pounding. The box lid was open, the dancer spinning perfectly. And beside it lay a note she swore hadn't been there before. "The world always takes its due, my love. But sometimes, it waits until you've healed before it knocks again." Her pulse froze. She flipped the note. No signature, but the paper smelled faintly of rain and iron. And then she saw the clock. It had stopped, every hand frozen at 11:11. Her reflection in the window began to shimmer, ever so slightly delayed. When she raised her hand, it followed half a second too late. The feather on the table flickered between white and black. Elara whispered to the silence, "Kael?" The reflection smiled, his smile. Then the glass rippled, and from somewhere beyond the pane came his voice, faint and aching. "There's always another second to steal if your heart still wants it." The feather burst into light. The room went dark. The light from the feather didn't fade. It folded, rippling outward in concentric rings that pulsed through the air like living echoes. The windows rattled, every clock in the apartment stuttered, and the silver pocket watch on her nightstand began to spin backward. Elara stumbled toward it. "Kael?" His voice came again, soft and near, like a whisper caught between seconds. "There's a door opening, Elara. But you'll have to decide which side of time you belong to." Her reflection in the window shifted once more, this time showing not her apartment, but the still city beyond, the one without seconds. Only now it looked different. The sky wasn't gray. It shimmered gold, as if dawn had finally come for that frozen place. The reflection extended its hand toward her, and on the glass, written in fog, appeared a single phrase, "The heart remembers." Elara pressed her palm to the words. The surface of the window rippled like water, warm to the touch. The sensation of contact, true, remembered, shot up her arm like electricity. In that instant, the ache of forgetting shattered. She remembered everything. The rain, the music box, his last look before the light took him, and love, fierce, endless, unfinished. The room began to dissolve around her. Time slowed, then stopped. Kael stood on the other side of the glass now, clear and alive, though faint as a dream. You came back once, he said, reaching out. Will you come again? Her fingers hovered a breath away from his. If I do, what happens to the world? He smiled sadly. It will move on without you. But love never waits. It lingers between moments until someone dares to follow. The clock struck once. 11:59. Elara's tears shimmered like starlight. She whispered, "Then I'll follow." And as the final tick began to sound, she stepped through the glass. Into the world between seconds. The instant she crossed the glass, sound vanished. No ticking, no heartbeat, no breath, only stillness. Yet, in that stillness, warmth bloomed. Kael stood before her, real, solid, smiling in a way that made her remember everything. Elara, he breathed, as though her name itself restarted the universe. She fell into his arms, and this time, her hands remembered. Every line of his skin, every heartbeat he'd given up for her. For a while, there was nothing but that. Two souls wrapped in the hush of unending time. The frozen city stretched around them, no longer gray, but shimmering gold. The faces of her echoes, the other Elaras, watched silently from the edges, smiling before fading into light. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's borrowed, Kael said softly. Time gave us 1 second more. 1 second to be what we were. She looked into his eyes, tears catching the light. Then we make it the longest second that ever was. Kael laughed, a sound that cracked the silence, soft and alive. As he kissed her, the city began to move again. Slowly, gently, everything around them pulsed with a single heartbeat, theirs. And just as the golden light flared to blinding white, Kael whispered against her lips. When hands forget again, hearts will find their way. Then the light folded inward. Elara awoke in her apartment once more, warm sunlight, ticking clocks, the world alive. The feather, now completely white, rested beside the music box. She wound it. The melody was perfect. And though she couldn't see him, she felt it, the soft brush of a hand against hers, invisible but real. Time, at last, had learned mercy, years passed. Seasons turned like whispered promises, and still, every day at 11:11, Elara would pause, just for a heartbeat. She never knew why. It wasn't habit, it was instinct, something beneath thought. She'd stop whatever she was doing, painting, reading, laughing, and her hands would tingle, as if remembering a touch the mind could no longer name. Sometimes, when she looked at the sunlight refracting through her window, she'd see a flicker, two silhouettes overlapping for the briefest instant, then gone. But she always smiled, because she'd learned something most people never do. That love doesn't need time, it is the pause between seconds. The white feather stayed by the window, unmoving, unaging. Until one spring morning, when the light caught it just right, it began to turn gold. Somewhere, far beyond the ticking world, Kael stood at the edge of the golden city, watching. His watch, her watch, glowed softly in his hand. A quiet voice spoke behind him, familiar and warm. Do you think she still remembers? Kael smiled, eyes on the endless dawn. Every time the world stops to breathe. And as the light stretched into forever, the clock tower's hands began to move again, not forward, not back, but outward, rippling into eternity. For every heart that refused to forget, for every love that paused time to exist, the world would always keep one secret second.
For them.